Welcome to the Art of Living Proactively, episode 238 with Catherine Steele. In this episode, I discuss with Dr. Catherine Steele about her background in psychology and occupational health, her current work in coaching, academic research and writing. And she provides an overview of what health coaching is as far as facilitating behaviour change and supporting clients in enacting sustainable habits. She emphasises about empowering individuals to take charge of their health regardless of workplace wellness programs. And she really advocates for a more proactive root cause approach to lifestyle medicine and stresses modelling healthy living for children through education. And overall, she conveys the importance of self-awareness, motivation, community support, and education in making incremental changes for long-term health. Catherine is also part of the Tree of Life, the Cancer Coach program, and we discuss many issues around that as well. So that's this episode with Catherine Steele, episode 238. Hope you enjoy this episode. If you do get some value from this, please do share it with anyone who would really appreciate this. Remember, the episode is also on YouTube. You can watch the actual video of Catherine and I discussing things. Please do leave a review and I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Art of Living Proactively. My guest today is Catherine Steele. How are you, Catherine?
I'm good, thanks, Tony. How are you?
I'm good. Oh, actually, I guess, should I refer to you as Dr. Catherine Steele?
Yeah, I mean, that's the official, I suppose. I'm not particularly precious about it, but yeah, I won't make you do it all the way through though.
Right, okay. So, and Catherine and I know each other from, I did a course with the FMCA, the Functional Medicine Coaching Academy, a couple of years ago. And Catherine was my facilitator, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was facilitator.
So, and that's where and then since then we've sort of crossed paths a few different times and with the UK Health Coach Association and other ventures as well. And seems like you've got your hands in many pies, what you're doing in Leicester University and Cancer Coach and the UK Health Coach Association and so on. So I was thinking, how do I introduce you? Because you do so many things. So I think it's better you introduce yourself and what all the things you do.
I've got friends that describe me a bit like a Jack Russell. I've got sort of lots of enthusiasm for lots of different things. So my main role is I'm an associate professor of psychology at the University of Leicester, and I lead their postgraduate program. So that looks at sort of occupational psychology, general psychology, and also at coaching. So that's my main job, which is sort of teaching, research, and practice there. I've also got a role as behavioural sciences director, academic advisor for the Cancer Coach. And then, again, I do sort of various things. So I'm currently the research lead for the division of coaching psychology. So yeah, lots of little bits and pieces. I run a small business called Turquoise Wellbeing, where I do my own coaching and coaching supervision. So it all falls under the remit really of workplace health, coaching and coaching psychology. So that's anything to do with those things I'm interested in.
Let's start with psychology. So when did you, I'm presuming you did a degree, is that how you first got into psychology? What was it that made you want to go into that in the first place?
I think a long time ago, because it was my first degree. I've always been really interested in people. I have a really, really curious nature in terms of strengths. Curiosity is a strength. I think, I'm very interested in who people are, how we interact together, what makes the world, what makes us all kind of tick. So that really interests me. And then as I was doing my undergraduate degree, I think everyone goes into it wanting to be a clinical psychologist. That's what we all want to do. Or at the time, because it was sort of in the 90s, everyone wanted to be cracker. For anyone that can remember that in the UK, as forensic psychologist working in the prison service. But then I was introduced to occupational psychology, which is about psychology applied to work. And that just really interested me because I thought, well, work affects everybody. Hopefully we're not all going to meet a forensic psychologist. We won't all meet a clinical psychologist, but we all have something to do with work, even if it's unemployment, volunteering, we have a connection with the workplace. So, and I'd never really thought of that from a psychological perspective before. So that sparked my interest and sort of followed on from there, really.
And so where did you go from there? I mean, obviously, I know all about the stuff with FMCA and UK Health Coach Association and so on, but what happened after you did that degree?
So I did a master's in occupational psychology and I started work in human resources. So I was working in HR, fairly quickly realised that wasn't quite what I thought it was, because I thought it was very much about supporting the employees in the workplace. And I think it is much better now, but obviously there's an organisational element to it as well. And that didn't really interest me as much. I was much more interested in the individual aspect. At that point, I was doing work in coaching as well. I got introduced to coaching through that work. I then got offered a PhD, which was sponsored by a police service. And that was actually looking at careers. So looking at people's career development, how organisations supported careers. And I think tangentially from that, I got interested in workplace health and workplace well-being. So, when you start to look at how you manage somebody's career, inevitably it's a trajectory, isn't it? So you start to look at, why people would want to stay within one organisation, why they might not want to stay in an organisation. And then I think I was just at a stage in my life where relatives were starting to experience health challenges, and it all kind of came together. And a lot of those were stress related. So then after the PhD, I worked in a consultancy for a while. And then in probably about 2010, went back to academia and started a full-time academic post.
You mentioned before we started recording about how you and Penny are in the process of writing a book. So do you want to bring us up? Well, let everyone know about.
Yeah, so a passion for both of us, I think, is about the workplace. So we're both really passionate about health at work, and also knowing that all the stats are showing us that, sickness absences are high, rates of chronic illness in the working age are going up. So, it's a problem for organisations, but it's a problem for individuals as well. So it's affecting kind of both sides of that. There's a lot, when you talk about workplace well-being, my experience of that is a lot of people look at stress and burnout. When you think about well-being at work, it's stress and it's burnout or it's mental health. And you have fantastic schemes like mental health first aid. Mind has a great site around kind of workplace well-being. But taking our sort of functional medicine background, you mentioned that we sort of met at FMCA, the Functional Medicine Coaching Academy. There's that root cause piece that for me is really missing in workplace health. So much of how we work, if we use our kind of branches in terms of, functional medicine and our pillars of health, is toxic. A lot of people don't have time to eat properly. They don't sleep properly. Rest isn't valued. There's certainly no time for movement. And that got worse, I think, as people are working from home. You're not even moving between offices, let alone moving how we're designed as humans to move. So we're kind of hoping to present a bit of a different approach, I think, with the book in terms of really looking at root cause health and what individuals can do about it, to try and empower individuals. I think quite often we think, well, we can't do it because our workplace is toxic or our managers are toxic. But really from a coaching perspective, looking at, well, how do we empower individuals to take charge of their health, regardless to a certain extent of what the workplace is. There are always little steps that you can take. But also, another part of it will be aimed at sort of managers and senior leaders. How do you create a really healthy workplace? People don't want to recruit talent and have really good talent to have it fall over in their 40s and 50s or even earlier, as we're seeing now. Because then you're losing people and then the organisation's got a sickness rate. So what does a really healthy workplace look like? And it's not bringing in cakes for everyone's birthday. It's not the mild track around outside. It's so much more than that. But I think it's an area that isn't really explored that much. So yeah, they're very, really, really early days, but a project we're both really excited about.
So in a way, from what you just said, is it a lot of it, well, some of it is about being more proactive?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of a podcast, yeah. It's about being proactive, but it's also about knowledge, I think, isn't it? Because I think, we talk about this in health coaching. I think it's insulting to say that people don't know what to do to support their health. It's actually putting in the structures and the support and the mechanisms to be able to put it in place. It's hard. It's hard to buck the trend. It's hard to be the only person drinking water while everybody else is having wine. It's hard to, be the person who's made their own Tupperware salad when everyone else is going to the canteen and having fish and chips. It's quite difficult to be that person. So how do you get that accountability? How do you get teams to work together? And how do you really sell the benefits, that you are going to feel so much better if you do this? From a manager, your team are going to perform so much better if you enable this. You have different food in the canteen, if you have different things available. There's been quite a lot of interesting stuff around this 4-day working week in the UK at the minute. And I think that'll be really interesting to see what happens. Just giving people another day of leisure time, a bit more autonomy, because that's a big one for health as well, is having autonomy. Yeah, I'm really interested to see what comes out of these little experiments around.
And so is the book aimed at a particular demographic, or who is it aimed at?
Well, we've kind of said anyone in work, just to try and keep the audience nice and big. But I think There will definitely be a focus for managers and HR professionals within it. So looking at people that are responsible for workplace occupational health physicians as well. We've said GPs, because obviously, GPs are at the front end of this. They see the people that are, really struggling and are suffering from those things like stress and burnout. But it's then exploring a little bit more, what's actually causing that? What is it about the way that workplace or that work team is structured that's causing? And it's often multifaceted, isn't it? Not one thing.
And have either you or Penny written a book before?
Yes, both of us have. Yeah. Yeah, I've written sort of academic text, so textbooks, and also done some chapters in edited books. Penny's written most recently a book on leadership in the NHS as well. So yeah, we've both got experience. We both love writing. So yeah, a bit of a passion project hopefully for us both.
So have you got a plan, a date you hope you would get the book out by?
Yesterday. I think realistically it's at least 12 months, isn't it, between sort of editing and things. So we're just still negotiating and sort of coming up with the final structure. At the minute, I'm working on things like sample chapters as well. But yeah, it for me, and I know for her as well, it feels like a book that's necessary and a book that's needed and is quite timely. So yeah, it's just fitting it in the day job, isn't it? Whilst also keeping ourselves healthy and well with the challenge.
A few months ago on this, or by the time this episode comes out, it will be a few months. Luke Watts from the Cancer Coach was a guest on this podcast. And obviously you're involved with a Cancer Coach as well. So for anyone who didn't catch that episode, could you briefly explain what is the Cancer Coach and what is your role in there?
Yeah, so I'm involved with the Tree of Life, which is sort of part of the Cancer Coach list of organisations. The Tree of Life is an online program designed at preventative healthcare. So we're following the sort of four the main pillars of health. And it's about, again, being proactive and looking at what you can do to support your health. So my role with the organisation is I'm the behavioural sciences director and academic advisor. So we're going to be looking at things like engagement, also working with a team of health coaches as well to look at how we actually enact that change. So we can give people the knowledge and design programs that gives people the knowledge, but that holy grail piece is the how. How do you use behavioural science to actually change, to facilitate change and also sustainable change? So trying to bring some of my knowledge from sort of psychology background and behavioural science background into the programs that they offer. And also the evidence-based piece as well. We always want to be really careful with what we're doing in this area because it's, it is open to critique. That's the nature of it. So the more firmly attached to the evidence base we can be and really understanding what good evidence looks like, I think that's really important in this sort of commercial health space to have that.
So the Tree of Life, when there's as you said, there's like an education aspect. It could be really helpful to so many people if the marketing works out well and it gets out to many people. It could help a lot of people start to become more proactive in a way, I guess.
Absolutely. The potential for programs like the Tree of Life, I think, are huge. And I was actually in a meeting with somebody else around coaching this morning, and I think it's so timely. There is such a need at the minute. People are struggling. People have been struggling, I think, for a long time. People are aware of, chronic illness. I'm in my early 40s, and I'm already seeing a lot of my friends, polypharmacy, struggling. And, we've got young kids, we don't want to be feeling like that at this stage of our life. That's how you might don't really want to feel like it in your 60s and 70s either, but you certainly don't want to be feeling like it in your late 30s and 40s. That's not okay. And I think that's really concerning when we look at this. I think the cancer diagnosis at the minute in working age adults is really high. And again, we're seeing younger and younger diagnoses of things like autoimmune disease, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue. I think we do really need to look at what's the cause. How are we living? How are we contributing to this? And it's a really difficult conversation to have, isn't it? Because I think it can very easily stray into blame and people almost taking then too much personal responsibility for it because it's not about that. It's about this is the environment that we're in. There are all kinds of reasons that we could talk about as to why we're in the environment that we're in. And I'm far beyond my expertise. But it's a case of how do we recognise that? And then just take those little steps one by one to make it different. And also the bit like osmosis, isn't it? How do we kind of filter it to other people? So, you see somebody over there looking really shiny and well, what are they doing? And how can I get some of that? That's how I like to see it sort of happening as part of communities, really.
Are you aware of any countries that are doing this well, that do have a sort of a better approach, say, than the UK and the US anyway?
I mean, I'm sure you'll know, Tony, about the Blue Zone. Reading Dr. Mark Hyman's book, actually, The Forever Young, at the minute, and he talks about the time that he spent in places like Sicily. And there's definitely other countries that do it better or do it differently, and that are just more. I think even in the UK, there are probably different areas that are doing it differently and doing it better. So I live in quite a rural area, for example, and I know that it's much easier for me here to get out and go for a really long walk. It's kind of hilly. It's outside. I'm getting, all the fractals from nature and really getting a different experience to when I've lived more in a city centre, and it's quite a different experience. I can still get out and go for a walk, but it might be by a main road. It's just different. But on the other hand, here from a community perspective, it's probably more isolated than when I was living, somewhere where there were literally people on the doorstep. There were coffee shops on the doorstep. So it's all about balance, isn't it? And finding what works for you, I think, and knowing yourself well enough to know what works for you.
So let's talk about the coaching that you do. What was it that attracted you to coaching?
God, it was such a long time ago. That's a really interesting question. I don't remember being asked that. I think it's my curiosity again. I've got a very solution-focused nature, which is both a blessing and a curse, I think. Really interested in sort of looking at what the problem is and looking what the potential solutions are. And I think coaching, appealed to that side, very much goal-driven, goal-directed, looking at, exploring solutions. It's facilitative as well. So I think I was in a teaching role at the time, and I think there's a lot of coaching in teaching, particularly in higher education. So thinking about, how do we get people to transfer their learning? How do we get people to change? I think, when I was in consultancy, I was also working a lot in things like assessment centres and talent development centres. And, again, there was a lot of coaching in that, how do you get people to be the best they can be? And I guess gradually that's just been translated into, okay, so how do we get people to feel the best that they can? So from a organisational perspective in terms of talent and coaching people to really perform well, actually there are other things underneath this as well. It's not just about behaviours and competencies, it's actually about lifestyle choices.
I think a lot of people don't really understand what a health coach is. Could you explain what is a health coach?
Can try. I mean, it's so many things, isn't it? I mean, a health coach, they're not an expert. They're not an expert in you. They're not an expert in your condition. So you might have a diagnosis. They're not there to be the clinician that knows everything about your condition, but they are there to help you facilitate change. So to me, a health coach is somebody who has a knowledge of health and an understanding of what it takes to be healthy. But then they are also an expert in behaviour change. To me, health coach is a behaviour change expert. That's where that's this golden piece that they have, is they know how to facilitate behaviour change. They know how to support you with behaviour change. They're not doing it for you. I think really skilled health coaches are also good at that challenge piece, because change isn't easy. We know change isn't easy. If it was, we'd all be doing it. If it was really easy, we'd just be doing it. And it's not. And we'd be doing it consistently, not like this, which is how for most of us, change happens. So I think there's a big thing about the way health coaches challenge us gently and in the right direction. But yeah, I think health coaching is about being a behaviour change expert and knowledge of health.
Is there anything that you would say, any myths about behaviour change, things people think about behaviour change that aren't really true?
Things people think about behaviour change that aren't really true. Then it's all about discipline. All about discipline. If we were just more disciplined and we were better people, then we'd be better people. And I think quite a negative way of looking at it. It's sort of like the New Year's Eve effect, isn't it? And I know we've spoken about this before, I'm sure, at FMCA. 31st of December, well, from tomorrow I'm going to be a completely different person. I mean, it's just not realistic, is it? And if I don't, I've failed. I think we can be really hard on ourselves when it comes to behaviour change. And as soon as we feel or a taste that we failed, then we just get. So I think that's a big, it's not just about discipline. It's about really understanding your motivation. It's about really understanding why you want to do something. There are very sort of experts, and the names escape me now, the guy that does a lot of work around reverse engineering. So basically, how do you want to feel when you're 90? Therefore, right. What do you need to do today? And I think that's really important. And that isn't just about, I need to get on with it and be better. It's about, I need to really think about, how do I want to feel at that age, and what do I want my life to look like? And if I want that, then I probably need to go to that yoga class today. And that's probably the most important thing on my to-do list. Or I will skip that cake. Or I'll save the bottle of wine till Friday rather than tonight. It's just those little things, isn't it? That if we think about much further ahead, and that actually needs to impact our day to day. And that isn't just about self-discipline or failing or not being good enough. It's so much deeper than that.
One thing about behavior changes that I sometimes think about is many people are not as kind to themselves as they could be. We all probably need to be a lot kinder to ourselves than we are. And in an aspect of that is we also need to be kind to our future selves. And so how, if our future selves in 20 years time, there's certain things that if we do now, certain habits, behaviors, is going to be much kinder to our future self in 20 years time. It's trying to put that across sometimes to people and get them to understand that.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm a health coach. I try and, I think we all do our best, don't we? And we do the best we can, but there is an element, I suppose, of committing to practice it, isn't there? So I journal quite a lot, and I will very often journal about my future and that kind of, and if I do it first thing in the morning, that tends to help me keep on. But that's just for me. That's why I think this self-awareness is important, and again, what we want in the future is very individual, isn't it? It's very, unique to us. And it's a conversation we don't really have. We don't even really have it necessarily with our partners or with our children or parents. It's quite an intimate conversation to have, isn't it? What we want our future to look like and what we really, really want that to look like and feel like. And it's probably an important conversation to encourage people to have, isn't it?
Yeah. There's a guy called Peter Attia. I don't know if you've come across him.
That's the one I was thinking of, yes, with the reverse engineering.
And I love he often talks about the Centenarian Olympics, or I think he calls it the Centenarian decathlon. And it's a concept that I often think about. And so he talks about, well, if you want to be competing in the Centenarian Olympics, you need to be at a certain level of fitness and strength and flexibility and so on at the age of 100 to be able to take part in that contest. So therefore, to be at that level at 100, you need to be at this level at 90, at this level at 80, and this level at 70, and so on. It's a great concept.
It is, and if we all thought like that, we'd probably live very differently. If we all really thought about, fundamental, and they say, don't they, a lot of people come to lifestyle medicine, functional medicine through some kind of trauma. And that's the bit that I wish, I could do differently in the work that I do. I wish I could have reached people before that happened, before that diagnosis, before that trauma, before that loss. And I haven't figured that one out yet. And if you find anyone that does, please point me in their direction, because wouldn't it be great? I mean, we talked before we started recording, families and children is a big one for me. My daughter's 10, and, we try and model a certain way of living, but I do think it's really hard because there was a program recently talking about children are actually eating more ultra processed foods than adults in the UK percentages, and that's terrifying when you throw in hormones and everything else. But again, it's that environment, isn't it, and that modelling. So let's hope that we can try with the younger generation to get to this stuff, before they're in their 40s or before they've had a diagnosis or before something happened to them that causes this sort of about turn that we see so often in clients. I mean, that would be amazing. That's why, like Nirvana, that would be great.
There's a guy called Sean Stevenson, and for a few years, he's been saying that he thinks that I forget what timeline it was, 10, 20, 30 years time, we'll look back upon this period and think, how could people be so barbaric in feeding children, like all this junk food that they're given? And for many years, he was the only person I ever heard saying that. But recently I've heard other people saying sort of similar thing.
There does seem to be a bit of a movement. I mean, obviously Jamie Oliver's been talking about school dinners and things for a long time. It's just the norm though. It's the norm. And in some ways, when I send my daughter off with her packed lunch, and I know she's probably looking at her friend's packed lunch and thinking, mine's quite different. That feels cruel because I'm not feeding her the same food as a lot of her friends, and that's just personal choice. It's just what we choose to do. But I know she finds that hard, and there must be times that's difficult. And I mean, that's the whole. We've talked about Pilar Gerasimo and the healthy deviant approach. But it's the whole marketing around children's food. It's huge, isn't it? You know, when you go into a supermarket, the sort of section on packed lunches is your dairy dunkers, it's crisps, it's bars. But there are some people out there, I think, more and more that are doing a lot around home cooked children's snacks and foods. But again, it's that lifestyle piece, isn't it? If we're all working and, it isn't just time. It's more than time. It's habit as well, isn't it? And it's the habit of, we made a sourdough starter a couple of years ago and I'd wanted to do it for years. And I wish I'd done it years ago because it was so easy. And now, we can bake bread, we can make pizza bases, and it genuinely is really easy. If anyone ever is thinking about doing it, it's so easy. And I wish I'd done it years ago. But things like that, it's just lost knowledge, isn't it? And our sort of generations before us, that knowledge has been lost. And hopefully we can get some of that back and pass that on quickly to the future generation.
When you were saying that, I don't know where, it just reminded me of, I can't remember which country it is. I think it's Peru or Chile, where a couple of years ago, they banned all advertising for sort of fast food, processed food to children on TV, any media. And I've been meaning to, it's just reminded me actually that I need to go and check what has happened since then. And, what has their health started improving? Have you heard about that?
I don't know, but I'd love to know more about, there must be pockets of society where people live differently and do things differently. And I think we're all just trying to do the best, aren't we? We're all trying to do the best when it comes to our own. I fundamentally believe that we are all trying to do our best when it comes to our own health and certainly to our kids' health. No one's trying to not do that. I just think the environment makes it really difficult. And that's why I say it's not about discipline. It's not, not about those sort of things. It's a much bigger conversation than that, isn't it? Around how we live and what we're doing. And I think that's why going full circle back to the workplace. That's part of our environment, isn't it? For most of us, work forms some part of our environment. And if that isn't a healthy place to be and there aren't really, ground roots for healthy practices there, then it's really difficult to put them in everywhere else. If you're working crazy hours, if your expectations of your organisation, just at the minute with the cost of living crisis as well, just to get enough money to live and actually asking people to do a load of other things is really difficult. So it's all of these things need to be sort of considered together, don't they?
You talked about families and children is a big area for you. What changes would you like to see in that?
There are some really big ones, but I think it's knowledge. And I think that's starting to come. So I think a lot of people were quite shocked. I think, was it a Panorama program? It was about ultra processed foods. And I've seen some of the sort of conversations around that. And I think people were quite surprised. I know Tim Spector's done some things, what is ultra processed food? How do we recognise? Because certainly, some children's snacks that we think are healthy, I've seen him identify on his social media that is ultra processed. If it's got a number of ingredients that you don't recognise, then that is an ultra processed food. Even, as healthy as it looks, it might be a fruit bar or something. It's still full of different things that aren't great. So I think there's a big education piece there. I'd love to see it on curriculums for schools. When I used to do, around my age, we did cooking at school when we cooked. And, I just don't think that happens very much anymore in terms of children learning about nutrition and learning about, they learn about some aspects of nutrition, but really learning about health. Because once you've got that knowledge, I heard it described, it was actually Dorian Yates, the bodybuilder, on a podcast ages ago, and he described this as the crack in the dam. Actually, once you've got this knowledge, you can't go back. The water just keeps coming and you can't go back. So once you understand and you really understand more about health, and I'm 20 years on, still learning all the time about different things that we can do, different practices, things that I might have done originally. I'm like, maybe that wasn't the best change. Maybe I need to look at something else. So it's an ongoing, lifelong process, I think. But I do think that once you start looking at it, you can't sort of put the blinkers on and go backwards, and you have to make changes from that point. So I guess education is a big one, isn't it, for kids?
About education, I listen to quite a few podcasts around sort of AI in health and AI in education. And I've heard a few discussions recently with various people sort of quite high in education in the UK, in Europe, in America and so on. And I think the common theme that seems to be from all of these sort of different conversations is with AI and tools like ChatGPT and all the other sort of similar tools, education is going to have to change quite drastically in the next couple of years. I think it's fascinating what those changes may be.
I mean, in my sort of main role in university rather, is something that's being talked about a lot in terms of, it's not just about, I think initially we've been talking about, how do we assess people? How do we make assessments in education? But much bigger than that is, well, what even is education now? The knowledge is out there. What does education look like? What are we teaching people to do? And maybe it is going to be about teaching people to look after themselves and to care for themselves and to be kind to themselves and kind to other people. Because isn't that the bit that's innately human? I wonder whether that is the bit that is actually human. And a lot of this other stuff can be generated in different ways. And maybe there's something about connection as human beings, that connection to ourselves, that connection to other people, and valuing. Maybe that's the education of the future. Wouldn't it be great? It'd be amazing.
Are you still involved in the UK Health Coach Association?
Yeah, I'm still a member of the UK International Health Coaches Association. I mean, they just do so much, don't they? They do all their CPD, all of their events and things. So yeah, they've done some stuff recently. I think at the IPM conference, I wasn't able to go, unfortunately, because I had some other commitments. But yeah, I mean, they're really championing, I think, the role of health coaches in the UK, which is great. They're the only organisation I know of that's specifically focused on health coaching. So yeah, they're.
So is the number of health coaches increasing quite a bit in the UK?
Again, I think so. I don't know for certain, but I think they are. I mean, certainly the number of people training, the number of training programs in health coaching seems to be increasing. The NHS, obviously, and they've sort of just published their future workforce plans, and health coaching is part of that. So to be increasing the number of health coaches working in the UK over the next sort of 10 to 15 years. And I think the NHS just recognising health coaching is important as well. So certainly in areas like diabetes, they're being used a lot more. But there's so much potential for health coaches. And I did hear the podcast that you did with him, and very much talking about, we have business coaches, we have mentors, we have life coaches, we have executive coaches, and hopefully, health coaches is the new tranche of those kind of things, because it is a different skill. The coaching is sort of fundamental, isn't it, in terms of the coaching models that we might use or the type of conversation. But that health focus, I think, is quite unique when it comes to health coaching, and that real understanding of sort of what mental, physical and spiritual well-being actually looks like and what it takes to get there is different to other types of coaching.
We're flying through as far as time is concerned, Catherine. What is there a book that comes to mind that has really moved you for any reason? It doesn't have to be recent, it could be at any time in your life, but something that sort of stays in your memory that's moved you.
There are probably 2 or 3, because I did have to think about this actually. There was a gentleman he's passed away now, unfortunately, called David Servan-Schreiber. I don't know if you've come across his work. And he wrote a book called The Anti-Cancer Lifestyle. And I think I came across that probably in the early 2000s. And then his second book was called Healing Without Freud or Prozac. They're very much about natural approaches to health. And the anti-cancer lifestyle struck me at a time when some family members had cancer diagnoses. And it was really like, okay, I need to look at this and really understand it. And then obviously the book on mental health, just because I was working in psychology at the time. So they were the first I'd ever seen really around, so I don't even like the word alternative, but lifestyle medicine approaches to health. And then the other that was a big game changer for me was Kelly Brogan's first book, A Mind of Her Own. Again, really focusing on mental health and really understanding that there are different approaches to mental health. And again, that's just sort of my psychology background, I think, as to why I was attracted to those. Because that had just never been thought of. If you were depressed, you had Prozac. If you were anxious, you had beta blockers. That was sort of very much what the model was. So to suddenly see that, it might be about what you're eating. It might be about how you're living. It might be a perfectly normal response to the environment you're in. And therefore it's the environment that needs to change. They were real game changers. And I'd say they were the cracks in the dam, I guess, for me.
Is there any questions about what you do and your thoughts around coaching and psychology and so on that I haven't asked that you be useful for the listeners to know?
Which I can't. No, I don't think so. I think we've had a really rounded No, I don't think so. I think we've had a really rounded conversation. I mean, I think the coaching market is a little bit confusing, and I hope that will change. Not really a question as such, but I think for the end user, what we do can be tricky to access it. And I think it would be good for people to be able to navigate a bit more clearly. And I guess that's role for people like the UKI, HCA, the UK International Health Coaches Association, is really to market health coaching to the end user, which very much I think is what they're about. So people can understand, why they might need a health coach, why they might want one, why they might need one. And then once they've identified that they need one and committed to that, how do they find a good, what are they looking for? Because, coaching's a big marketplace. There's a lot of people offering coaching out there. And I mean, the research certainly suggests that, part of the effectiveness of coaching is about the relationship between the coach and the coachee. So yeah, I think it's also about, doing a few sessions, because most coaches will offer a trial session. So, have a few conversations with coaches and see where you feel the best fit. And don't be worried if the first one doesn't, don't think you're going to offend anybody. It's much better to find someone that you kind of have a connection with, because then you'll have
Absolutely. So if people want to find out more about you and what you do, where would they go?
So the official bio would be on the University of Leicester web pages under the sort of School of Psychology and Vision Sciences. I'm probably most active on LinkedIn or Instagram. So I'm just under Dr Catherine Steele on those two. Probably most active on Instagram, then LinkedIn, then Twitter. So yeah, any of those, find me.
And is there a quotation you particularly like?
Viktor Frankl, I'm going to say it wrong now, aren't I? Viktor Frankl, between stimulus and response, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And it's actually on the bottom of my email, so there's no reason for me to get it wrong. So between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space lies our growth and freedom. So, really, to me, that's about choice and having agency. And obviously, people that don't know, Viktor Frankl was a concentration camp survivor and a psychiatrist, and created something called logos therapy. The book, Man's Search for Meaning, I've read probably 3 or 4 times in the last few years, trying to just make sense of everything that's been going on. It's quite a small paperback and it's fantastic. But yeah, that idea of choice, between, there's a stimulus and there's a response, but there is a gap in between, and we all are making thousands and thousands of choices every day. And it's that gap where we really need to vote in terms of what we do, how we respond.
That's coincidentally my favourite quotation as well. It's something I think I first came across it, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago. And since then I think almost, I wouldn't say every day, but I regularly think about it. And I try and I certainly have succeeded in changing what was always my default response to the stimulus. And I no longer I wouldn't say in every situation, but in many situations, I don't have that default response necessarily. And I've changed the default in many cases.
It's having it on the wall somewhere, isn't it? It's like a constant reminder.
Yeah.
I've got a sort of board with it on. I think it's powerful. I think there's power in those words.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's funny. I was going to say, I'll put the actual wording in the show notes. I don't know if you're aware, there's a website called Quote Investigator, and they assert the words that are commonly attributed to that quote were never actually said in Man's Search for Meaning. He said something around that. The wording that you normally find on Google and whatever, he never said it in that word, in that order.
I'm going to have to read it again now.
I'll send you the link from Quote Investigator because it's a fascinating article. He goes into real Quote Investigator. What they tend to do is they examine well-known quotes like from Einstein and many other people. And did he really say what everyone thinks he said? And then he goes really deep into all these other sort of books and places and trying to find out what was the origin of these words. And it wasn't Einstein. It wasn't.
I'll have to send it. I have to change my email, Tony. Yeah, I'd be really interested to see that. Yeah.
So, and I'll put a link to the particular article in the show notes.
Brilliant.
Viktor Frankl did say something around that. He just didn't say it in the actual way that is commonly attributed to him.
Well, perhaps we can claim it then. Right?
Exactly. Well, Catherine, it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you very much. Best of luck with all the tons of things that you're doing.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the conversation, Tony, as always. Thank you.
Next week is episode 239 with Steven Borden. And Steven explains how blood flow restriction or BFR training works and its benefits. He outlines how BFR uses inflatable cuffs to restrict blood flow, which allows people to gain muscle and endurance at lower training intensities. He talks about how BFR can aid in rehabilitation, in travelling athletes, and also in cognition through lactate exposure, and a lot more around those areas. He emphasises about using it proactively when unable to train at higher intensities. And he advises starting with lighter loads and going close to failure for muscle growth. And overall, he conveys that BFR blood flow restriction training allows you to maintain momentum despite circumstances that may limit training, such as injury or older age and so on. So that's next week, Steven Borden, episode 239. If you enjoyed this week's episode with Catherine Steele, please do share with anyone who may get some value from it. It would be fantastic if you could leave a review for us on one of the podcast platforms, and hope you have an amazing week.